what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
It is Wednesday, July 11th, 2018, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room dealing with technical gremlins. And we're going to be just doing a show. And today our third hour guest is Robert Beardsley, who got into a legal, well, he to be honest, he escalated the situation. But he's one of these people who's been charged under this eavesdropping law. Because he wanted to record a police stop, and we'll be talking to him there in our third hour. On Monday, Daniel Amaduri from Future Money Trends will be our guest, talking about the economy, and we're working to get a few more guests in here as well. All right, so getting into the domestic political news here, the Democrats now have a strategy to deal with Kavanaugh, or at least temporarily. They're looking at the votes in the Senate. They don't have them to prevent his confirmation. So now their new strategy is that they're pushing to delay the confirmation hearings until after the Mueller probe ends. And of course, there is no end in sight for the Mueller probe. They could easily drag it all the way out to 2020. And yesterday I was saying if the Democrats think that they can prevent a confirmation between now and 2020, and an incoming Democratic president, that they might be smoking opium. But this looks like they're going to be strategy. Stall, 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 stall. Now, we got to see a lot of theater, if you will, regarding the nomination process, the careful vetting and the interviews and narrowing the search down bit by bit. But there's a story that's come on out from the Millennium Report that retiring Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy may have made a deal with Donald Trump to retire only if Trump agreed to pick his former law clerk and good friend Brett Kavanaugh to succeed him. So the fix may have been in all the way from the very, very beginning. And the fact of the matter is that Kavanaugh is drawing heat on both sides of the abortion debate. And this goes back to a case where he ruled back in 2016. It was called Garza versus Hargan. And it was a lawsuit brought by the American Civil Liberties Union against the Trump administration. And basically, the incident happened in 2016. And what it involved was an undocumented young girl who was being held in detention, and she was pregnant, and she wanted to have an abortion. And this was the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which shelters undocumented minors and has a policy of blocking pregnant teenagers in custody from obtaining abortions. Now, the majority of the judges in the case ruled to let the teenager obtain an abortion, and she did the next day. Kavanaugh wrote a dissenting opinion, and he said he called the ruling a radical extension of the Supreme Court's abortion jurisprudence that creates a new right for unlawful immigrant minors in U.S. government detention to obtain abortion on demand, meaning you, the taxpayer, gets to pay for it. And I don't think that's an unreasonable position. Now, in his dissent, Kavanaugh noted that the government has an interest in favoring fetal life, protecting the best interests of a minor, and refraining from facilitating abortion. So, of course, the Roe versus Wade people are up in arms. They're absolutely, they want their right to kill the unborn babies. And what's really amazing is these are the same liberals who are justifying the open borders movement by saying, it's for the children, we must take care of the children. A little bit of a double standard here. Now, as many people expected, Lisa Page was a no-show for her congressional testimony, and House Speaker Paul Ryan is up in arms about it, says they'll do what they need to do to basically get her in there, because congressional subpoenas for testimony are not optional. Now, Page was scheduled today to give a deposition to House lawmakers probing the FBI's handling of both the Clinton private email server investigation and whether Trump's presidential campaign colluded with the Russians. And she's a no-show. Paul Ryan is threatening contempt charges against Lisa Page if she doesn't come on in and talk. All right, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. So there's a battle shaping up between the FBI and the Department of Justice, which are part of the executive branch, and Congress. It's not supposed to be that way. Congress does have oversight responsibility on what the executive branch does. And I don't know why Donald Trump, who wanted to drain the swamp and who felt the wrath of the FBI and Department of Justice, isn't stepping in to do something about this. This is his second term at stake. Now, Nancy Pelosi was being interviewed by Rolling Stone magazine, and she dodged questions about her leadership, calling the question sexist. It's sexist to ask if she's suitable to lead. And then she went on to talk about the Senate Majority Leader and promptly forgot his name. She had to be reminded by an aide that it's Mitch McConnell. So Pelosi was not happy at the results of that interview. It sort of underscores the fact that she is in a state of deterioration here. Now, the latest poll numbers for the midterms are out, and 3 Senate Democrats are now running behind their Republican challengers. And Democrats are getting worried about the fall. They're getting worried about the fact that it looks like things might actually be getting better under Trump. And that's another reason why they're trying to flood this country with illegal immigrants, because they need those votes, even though non-citizens are not allowed to vote in our elections. Now, a lot of people are looking at Hillary Clinton now that confirmation has come on out that she is considering a run for the White House again in 2020. And this explains a lot of what's been going on. This whipping up of liberals to accost conservatives and Trump supporters in public. It's a brown shirt tactic. It explains why all of a sudden the very liberal management of corporate social media are enacting censorship tools and filters to block conservative content. And it explains the continued push for open borders, all of which Hillary is going to need if she's going to steal the White House in 2020. And a lot of people were calling attention to this photo that surfaced the other day, or actually, it was actually a video, of Bill and Hillary Clinton on a commercial jet. No private jet, no entourage, not even their Secret Service detail, which they still have. And Rush Limbaugh has come on out saying that, yeah, this is just a photo op trying to clean up their image ahead of a political comeback. They want to look like just plain folks. And it did strike me as odd that they were flying commercial, and I did wonder about it. Now, other people were saying, well, it's because their wealth has been frozen, over at the Clinton Foundation. And no, I don't think that is the case at all here. As you know, Donald Trump is going head-to-head with NATO, and it's actually brought up in a lot of people's mind, why is NATO still here? NATO was formed right after the end of World War II. It was the second international organization to be formed after the United Nations itself, and it was formed primarily because the United Nations at that time did not have a military force. Well, today it does. Through the Security Council, it can send the military of any member nations into a conflict zone. And so NATO is kind of a parallel organization. Carolyn Glick is out there saying NATO is the author of its own demise because of its continued ineffectiveness. And that NATO's moves along the western border of Russia are what's escalating tensions, not Russia. Now, as you know, Donald Trump is over there telling the other NATO nations they have to pick up more of the burden. They have to increase their military spending. And mind you, most of those nations he's talking to, they don't have the money because of the economic downturn in the EU. But that's what Trump is pushing for. And the European Council President, Donald Tusk, came back to him with a reply saying that you've got to stop berating NATO allies over military investment levels and respect the allies that you have. So there's a bit of a strain on that alliance. Paul Craig Roberts is out with a new article, The View of Russia in the West, and he's talking about how there is clearly this ongoing propaganda campaign to portray Russia as this crazed place run by a lunatic, and he names all the prostitutes who are out there trying to basically derail the upcoming Trump-Putin summit before it even happens. And that's Jonathan Chait, Amy Knight, Max Bergman, Yaroslav Trofimov, Roger Cohen, and then he ropes in there all the other de facto CIA assets that comprise the Western prostitute media. They're turning Putin into a superhuman who controls election outcomes throughout the West, murders people without rhyme or reason, and has President Trump under his thumb doing Putin's bidding. Now talk about your extreme and whacked out conspiracy theory. But Jonathan Chait in New York Magazine went even further, basically saying that Trump has been a Kremlin asset since 1987. They're getting desperate out there. Now, here's a bizarre article. This is out of antiwar.com. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is about to have another meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In fact, it's happening today, right now. And one of the leaks coming on out is that Netanyahu is going to offer a deal with Russia, that if Russia will get Iran out of Syria, that he, Benjamin Netanyahu, will bring an end to the U.S. sanctions against Russia. And Russia has previously said they don't have the capability of getting Iran out of Syria, and the Iranian presence is up to the government of Syria. But what's really interesting is Netanyahu's claim that he can get the U.S. to drop the sanctions. And if he's actually able to do it, it's another reminder of who is really running this country. Now, over in Syria, YPG has carried out a series of attacks against Turkish-backed forces in Afrin. Assad made a deal with the Kurds. They're now working together to get Turkey out of that part of Syria. Now, Turkey pushed into Afrin. They said it was just to get the terrorists, and then they made it very clear they have no intention of leaving. It's ours now. So there's another battle going on over there near Afrin. Meanwhile, the Syrian army continues to find U.S.-made anti-tank tow missiles in the country's south. And these tow missiles were discovered in a recently liberated settlement alongside mortars, shells of all calibers, improvised explosive devices, and communications and night vision systems, as well as other equipment made in Western countries. So I remember all the time ago when the U.S. was justifying this war in Syria, saying, we're there to get ISIS. We're there to get Al-Qaeda. And now that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are being driven on out, we find out they were, in fact, being armed by the United States as a proxy force against Assad. So the Syrian army liberated Garaz on Tuesday, freeing the area around the settlement's grain silos and central prison after battles that a reporter described as fierce. And an undisclosed number of militants were killed or wounded, and the rest were fleeing to neighboring areas. Those Syrian troops, they've had 7 years of this war. They're battle tested. They're very, very tough. Now, up in Germany, the scientific services of the German Bundestag, which is their version of the Congressional Research Service in the United States, has basically issued a report confirming once again The United States presence in Syria is illegal under international law. Russia's presence is legal because Syria asked them to be there. Iran's presence is legal because Syria's government asked them to be there. Now, we're starting to get some mixed signals coming out of Israel. So it may be that Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition is starting to fray around the edges. Israel's Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman said that Israel will not stand the presence of even one Syrian soldier in the buffer zone on the Israel-Syria border, and will hold the Assad regime responsible for any terror infrastructure in the Syrian Golan Heights, meaning get ready for a false flag. So Lieberman went on to say this attempt to establish terror infrastructure in the Syrian Golan Heights under the regime's purview is unacceptable, and we will operate with full power against any terrorist infrastructure we identify in the area, which means the bombs are going to be flying. But over on the other side, Israel started sending signals that they're not ruling out eventual ties with Syria's Assad. That now that this war is winding down, rather than try and ratchet up a new Israel-Syria war, that they may just say, yeah, we accept Assad is there and we're willing to negotiate. Of course, Assad would be silly to listen to any promises made by Israel here. Now, as you know, the U.S. and Israel still want the war on Iran. They're trying to goad Iran or bring down its government, get it to do something that would allow a military attack. And this latest piece of propaganda coming out of well, it's being reported in Russia today. Apparently, the State Department, I'm sorry, there was a diplomatic envoy from Iran that has been arrested, supposedly for links to terrorism. And the U.S. is now accusing Iran of using diplomats as cover for terrorism and using their embassies to harbor terrorists and terror operations. Now, Tehran is saying this is ridiculous. The diplomatic envoy was obviously set up to be arrested. But I think this is the first propaganda step into basically demanding the closure of Iran's embassies, not just in the United States, but basically in other countries around the world, to politically isolate them ahead of a coming war. Getting on back to NATO, Mike Pompeo is pushing for Iran sanctions during the NATO summit. He's back out there saying, all the rest of you got to sanction Iran. You've got to just turn the screws. You know, how dare Iran comply with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? They're not supposed to do that. So Pompeo is facing an uphill battle. It's going to be a very tough sell, especially for the European NATO members. Britain, France, and Germany are all signatories to the P5+1 nuclear deal. And the European Union has made resolutions calling on the entire Union to support the deal and resist more U.S. sanctions. But Mike Pompeo is going to be over there trying to change their mind, and who knows what threats he's going to use to do that. What may be happening, and we got a commercial break coming up here, but we're going to talk about this when we come on back. This may be regime change by sanctions, weaponizing sanctions and the economy to bring down the Iranian government. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Republic Broadcasting needs you. And if you are able to support Republic Broadcasting, there's no such thing as too small a donation. The postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to call in with a credit card or debit card donation or to pledge to be a recurring monthly subscriber is 724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. So we're talking about Iran. We're talking about Mike Pompeo is over at NATO pushing all those countries to sanction Iran, to just stop all economic interaction with them completely. And it's going to be a tough sell. In particular, when you have Russia and China, who are very powerful economies, who also signed the P5+1 agreement. So Pompeo has got an uphill battle. And what seems to be materializing is regime change by sanctions. And Trump advisor Rudy Giuliani is calling for regime change against Iran. And he's basically exploiting protests that are supposedly hitting the country over fears about the consequences of the reimposed sanctions. So they're weaponizing the sanctions. Now, a lot of the protests and riots appear to be the work, once again, of outside agitators, agent provocateurs. The United States has done this to Iran at least twice that we know of, back in 1953 when they brought down the legitimate government of Mohammad Mossadegh and installed the Shah of Iran. And in 1979, the people of Iran finally got fed up of living under puppet rule, and they gave the Shah the old heave-ho. So in 2009, once again, the U.S. went on in to try and stir up trouble, bring down the Iranian government, and they made two missteps. The first one was when they unveiled the flag of the new Republic of Iran, it turned out to be the Shah's flag, exact same flag. That threw the brakes on a lot of people thinking regime change might be a good idea. Then the son of the Shah went public announcing that he was ready to resume the peacock throne, and that was basically the end of that. But it looks like, once again, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And they're going to do that. Now, what's really interesting about all these sanctions here is that Donald Trump makes a point of insisting he's got nothing against the Iranian people and is only interested in opposing what he regards as the dangerous activities of their government. But from the sanctions, it is clear he's putting pressure on the people of Iran to try and get them to rise up and force a change of government, regime change. And if we're to believe Rudy Giuliani, the White House is now committed to bringing down that government. Meanwhile, the United States ambassador to Germany has urged Berlin to refuse Iran's request to withdraw 300 million euros from bank accounts held in Germany in the lead up to the new sanction. Now, the sanctions are not in place yet. So legally, Iran has every right to withdraw their money and bring it back home because they're going to need it there. But the U.S. is trying to get Germany to say, no, we're going to just hang on to it. And apparently, German Finance Ministry spokeswoman said the country is examining Iran's request to withdraw the funds from the Eurospace Iranische Handelsbank AG in order to satisfy part of its foreign currency needs when fresh U.S. sanctions against the financial sector take effect. And they're also saying their people need to have a supply of cash as well when the credit cards stop working. So Iran is trying to prepare for what they know is coming from the United States. And the U.S. is already out there trying to prevent Iran from recovering its own wealth. Now, interestingly enough, and this may be an indication that Mike Pompeo got a very chilly response at NATO, because a lot of countries are very dependent on Iran oil. And those sanctions would be very harmful, and so they're opposed to the U.S. policy. So Mike Pompeo actually came out with a statement saying that the U.S. will consider requests for waivers from Iran oil sanctions. In other words, certain countries will be exempt from the sanctions and will be allowed to do business with Iran. And I mean, the arrogance there of the U.S. deciding who does and does not do business with Iran should be alarming to everybody here. Okay, over in Israel, Israel has now bulldozed Khan al-Ahmar and effectively is burying the two-state solution. In fact, it's come on out that the maps of the settlements in the West Bank are actually quite inaccurate, and the settlements are more widespread. And Britain, France, Germany, and Italy and Spain have submitted a formal protest over the bulldozing of Khan al-Ahmar. More when we get back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about Khan al-Ahmar, which has been bulldozed by Israel, and it's drawn condemnation from around the world. And apparently, more than 70 Democratic lawmakers in Congress have spoken out about Israel's behavior toward the Palestinians. And that's a rare example of U.S. politicians standing up to Israel. Now, Israel's Science and Technology Minister, Ophir Akunis, declared yesterday that establishing a Palestinian state in the occupied Palestinian territory is unacceptable. And Akunis, who is part of the Likud party, is also claiming there are officials in the Trump administration who share his view. And once again, showing how humanitarian there are. As you know, there was an effort by Gazans to break the naval blockade. They sailed a whole bunch of boats out past the Israel-imposed 6-mile limit, and the Israeli Navy stopped this one boat. And on this boat were wounded protesters who were being evacuated for treatment in Cyprus, because Israel would not allow them to go to the West Bank for medical treatment. And now Israel won't allow them to go to Cyprus for medical treatment. And the Gaza hospitals are they're jammed full of wounded protesters. They're out of supplies. They really can't help these people other than to just simply amputate everything that got shot. And so Israel is once again showing its true self to the world here. Now, the Knesset is considering a bill that basically would fully institutionalize apartheid in the country. And it will legalize the creation of Jewish-only towns and neighborhoods. But Israel's President Reuven Rivlin is saying this is a bad move because it will only strengthen critics, saying that, yes, Israel has just declared itself legally an apartheid state. And Rivlin said that the legislation would harm Jews around the world, in addition to allowing communities to discriminate on the basis of religion and nationality. The bill would make Hebrew Israel's only official language and permit judges to rule according to Jewish law. But that's where Israel is going. They don't want to be a modern nation other than the nuclear weapons. They want to go back to being a Bronze Age tribal kingdom. And again, showing how petty that Israel can be. Over in the West Bank city of Hebron, there is an historical mosque called the Ibrahimi Mosque, and Israel has banned call to prayer 298 times. Because complaints from the neighbors, oh, we're hearing the call to prayer, we don't want to hear that. But meanwhile, Jewish settlers have organized parties with loud music until midnight inside the mosque itself. And they've set up huge camps in the southern courtyards of the mosque. This is another provocation, like they're doing at Al-Aqsa. They're trying to goad the Palestinians into doing something, anything, that can be used as a justification for a final military solution. Now, Israel has declared Al-Quds TV as terrorist media. Now, this is a Palestinian media agency. It's best known for being first on the scene and recording eyewitness videos of Israeli military atrocities against Palestinians. And it's now been banned by Israel. As the Israeli defense minister and former nightclub bouncer, Avigdor Lieberman, signed an order declaring Al-Quds TV to be a terrorist media organization. Now, Al-Quds is based in Beirut and has offices in the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel. Al-Quds TV began in 2008 and provides daily news coverage online and on its satellite TV channel. So Israel has just declared them terrorist media and banned them. They're trying to basically shut down in the flow of information. They don't want to change their behavior. They don't want to stop being what they are. They just don't want the world to know about it, don't want the world to criticize them. Now, up in Ireland, their Senate has backed a law banning trade with the Israeli settlements. And we're seeing more and more of this around the world. Now, here's a very interesting article. This came out of Mondo Weiss, and it's titled, Hasbara is Dead. And it's basically saying Israel's constant propaganda to explain why it's doing what it's doing to the Palestinians is starting to fall on deaf ears. Israel has given up trying to explain itself or sell its policies to fair-minded people because fair-minded people have all made up their minds. That bloody Monday massacre in Gaza has seen to that. It's Israel's version of Amritsar. It's the beginning of the decline. So Israel's propaganda is now focused on their hardcore supporters, rallying the base. Everyone else is tuning out. We're tired of hearing about Hitler and the Nazis and the Holocaust. That all happened, if it happened, before we were all born. Now, rights groups are demanding, well, actually they petitioned Israel to stop selling weapons to neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine. And concerns were raised that by a group of more than 40 human rights activists who filed this petition with Israel's High Court of Justice demanding the cessation of the arms deal. According to Haaretz, the petitioners have argued these weapons serve forces that openly espouse a neo-Nazi ideology and cite evidence that the right-wing Azov militia, whose members are part of Ukraine's armed forces and are supported by the country's Ministry of Internal Affairs, are using these weapons. So everybody's in the gun buying business, except, of course, American citizens. They don't want us to buy weapons. They want other countries to buy weapons and kill people with them. Now, getting on back to Korea, there is these two views of what happened. When Mike Pompeo returned, he came and he said progress was being made, but the North Koreans said that it was basically Pompeo was making these gangster-like bullying demands and that nothing really happened. And Mike Pompeo tried to defend himself in the media saying, hey, I know what happened there, I was there. Well, it turns out Mike may have been fibbing a little bit because according to this story out of CNN, word has come on out from the White House that Pompeo's North Korea meeting went, quote, as badly as it could have gone, end quote. Now, over at the New York Post, they're running an article saying it's clear China's behind North Korea's latest flip. Confused by North Korea's sudden hard line, look to China for answers. So when the Korean deal falls apart, Trump is going to blame China for it. We didn't do anything. Yeah, you did. You didn't negotiate in good faith. That's the problem. North Korea said, we'll surrender so much of our nuclear arsenal, you'll release so many of the sanctions, then we'll surrender more of our nuclear arsenal, and you'll release more of the sanctions, and just bit by bit we'll go through and get that done. And Pompeo went on in there with this idea that North Korea had to totally denuclearize. North Korea had to give the United States everything it wanted first before the U.S. would give them anything. And as I've said before, Trump and his administration, especially Mike Pompeo, don't understand the Asian concept of face. Kim Jong-un was never going to go for that deal. It would make him look bad, and he doesn't like to look bad. It could even embolden challengers for his power. So he's not going to do that. Now, Japan has apparently decided they're going to flip. They've basically closed the door to further cooperation with North Korea. They've shut down the communication channels. Remember when they opened up that channel so everybody could know where everybody else was on the ocean? Apparently, Japan is still trying to make an issue over Japanese citizens who they claim were abducted in the 1970s and 1980s by North Korean intelligence services. But Tokyo's actions to introduce their economic sanctions against Pyongyang make it impossible for the countries to approach an agreement on the issue. Japan is not going to get an answer as to what happened to those people or how it happened if they refuse to talk. So let's talk about the economy a little bit. Right now, over 30% of global wealth funds are reducing their stock holdings amid the trade woes. And it looks like overall in the markets, a lot of people are reducing their exposure to the stock market, but it's being kept up by a few very large buyers who are probably tied in with that plunge protection team. Got to keep that stock market up. Trump's gotten into the same habit that Bill Clinton did. He's waving that stock market like a flag saying, the economy is good, the economy is good, the economy is good. But I will grant you there are some positive signs. Let's give credit where credit is due to Donald Trump and his sanctions. Caterpillar is adding 250 jobs at their North Little Rock plant, and General Electric is expanding their Decatur refrigerator plant. So little small steps, and those are really good. The problem right now is that Trump is already talking about another $200 billion in sanctions on China. He could take it too far. There are experts warning that if the sanctions are too great, that it's going to really harm global trade. And because so much of our domestic economy is tied up with the global economy, we're all going to feel the pain here. Meanwhile, China has made a rather interesting strategic move. As you know, part of the reason to go into a country and blow it all up is so that you can then loan them the money to rebuild at interest. We certainly saw that in Iraq. And well, pretty much every place else the U.S. has invaded. There's always that, we must rebuild their nation, which means enslaving the people to our banks so that they can rebuild what the United States blew up. China is now stepping into the Middle East, and they're offering a massive package of loans and aid to Middle Eastern nations. They see that U.S. influence in the Middle East is fading, and they're stepping into that vacuum. Now, China will give $90 million in humanitarian and reconstruction aid to war-torn Syria, Yemen, Jordan, and Lebanon, and $15 million to Palestine. And they're talking about this package will include $20 billion in loans for projects in countries with reconstruction needs. So China's stepping on in to grab the prize. All right. Let's see where we are here now. I have to send a message to my control room. Okay, so Italy is once again surfacing as a major cause of concern in the Eurozone and even globally. Italy is basically dealing with a 2.4 trillion euro debt. Now, I know that seems very small compared to the U.S. debt, and it is, But it is still a major problem, and people are very concerned about the Italian banks. And because of how tightly knit the Eurozone economy has become, if the Italian banks were to collapse, they could take down the banks in several other member nations. They could take down the entire EU. So it's a serious, serious situation. Okay, down on the border, as you know, a court has ordered authorities to start reuniting children with their parents. And in order to make sure the children are going to their parents, they're administering DNA tests. And they've run into a little bit of a snag because apparently, at least in 2 cases, adults who thought they were parents of a child were determined not to be by the DNA testing, which means somebody was fooling around, or somebody swapped a baby at the hospital, which has been known to happen, or the DNA tests are flawed. So it's not clear how they're going to handle this, but these DNA tests are coming up negative. And Chris Meekins, who's directing the court-ordered family reunification, is saying the adults don't seem to realize they're not actually the biological parent of the child. I would definitely want to check those DNA tests, the testing kit, on somebody where you know this is their kid. And just see if it's really working all that well here. Now, Mexico's next president is planning his own border police force. But before you get excited, it's not on Mexico's northern border. It's on its southern border with Central America. Why? To stop undocumented immigrants, drugs, and guns from crossing into the country. And they're putting a major effort from the Mexican government. This from the same guy who's supposedly saying that everybody has a natural right to move to the United States of America for a better life, which strikes me as a little bit weird here. Okay, when we come back from this next commercial break, we're going to be talking about the dust-up over in Great Britain. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, so feel free to call on in, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And before we get into events in Great Britain, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Pete in Florida. Aloha, Pete. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Nice to talk to you again. I first want to start off by saying you're one of the major independent media outlets that consistently reminds us about all the crimes going on in Israel, and I thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome.
Secondly, every time Israel brings up the Holocaust, I want to say which Holocaust, because they seem to forget the Bolshevik Revolution, which to my mind would be the Holocaust, where upwards of 50 million, at least 20 million people were killed by one Jewish guy. I'm sorry to say that. Israeli guy alone. I don't remember the guy's name, but it was confirmed that at least 20 million people died at that one guy's hands,
Yes.
At least under his leadership.
Well, then look at what Pol Pot did over in Cambodia. There have been genocides all over, the Armenian genocide, but Israel is trying to basically monopolize the word Holocaust. They don't want anybody else to use it. It's like their registered trademark that they basically hurl at anybody that they're trying to silence.
Right. Alex Jones was not off when he created the InfoWars, website. It's obviously about information and language wars, and to me, bothers me more than anything is that it's about language. The other thing I wanted to talk about was this recent appeals court ruling 2-1 that shields the TSA agents. It gives them immunity from any kind of redress by the people, because apparently the TSA officers are not considered investigatory or law enforcement officers. But I dare you to walk away from a TSA checkpoint, and to think you're not going to be detained or arrested or, at least hassled. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was going to report on that a little bit later in the show, but it is amazing. I mean, we've seen all these abuses by TSA, and they do get out of control. They're not well trained. They're not well trained at all. And so you just get into this situation where they're free to abuse people. I mean, my worst experience with TSA was up at Seattle, where this butterfingered guy dropped and wrecked a rather expensive laptop. I didn't even get an apology, let alone an offer to replace the hardware. I was just told to get on my way. And I disagree with this appeals court ruling because, again, we're getting into a situation where anybody with a badge and a uniform is being indemnified for anything that they may do that abuses the American people.
Right, under the auspices of sovereign immunity. I mean, they're going after people who call themselves sovereign citizens in this country, and they're calling themselves sovereign citizens. Essentially, I know the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, calls itself sovereign citizens, and they have, they can't be sued or tried in court. I mean, it's the contradictory nature of it. It just kills me. Everything that you talk about, Mike, you're hitting on all that. Just the contradiction in terms of a sane moral judgment, looking at something, and the way these government employees like to look at how somehow they're better than us, or they're immune from us.
Oh yeah. They love that badge. They love that uniform. Anyway, listen, Peter, stay on the line. We got to do a station identification break. We'll be back with hour number 2 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Pete in Florida, and we're talking about this court ruling that says that no matter what the TSA do to you, they are immune from lawsuits. And I obviously disagree with that. We have too many institutions that are out of control because there is no restraint. If you have any group of people, whether it's TSA or the FBI or the Department of Justice or the local police, who just know that nothing will happen to them no matter what they do, it's inevitable over time. They're going to get more and more outrageous in their behavior. And I dread the next time we have to travel over what TSA will do.
Ironically enough, I traveled last week. I went up to Newark. Boy, that's a charming place. I kind of feel sorry for Dustin, our buddy in New Jersey. But that was probably the most pleasant TSA experience I've ever had, knock wood, because I've had worse. But to your earlier points about training, and when you brought up the police, Wyatt Cenac has a show on one of the premium channels. I don't remember if it's HBO or Showtime. Problems and something or other. But I disagree with a lot of what the guy has to say. But he's bringing up the realities that the police in this country, for the most part, there's no consistency in training. There's no confidence. And when the guy shows that in all 50 states everything is different, I mean, it's like, how do you look at these people except for having a badge and a gun, and they can throw you in jail? It's the same with the TSA. I mean, there's a problem with that. My solution for that is, let's eliminate the police. Right off the bat, just fire all the police, say, thank you for your service, have a nice day, go find another job, because we need to bring back the Second Amendment as it is written, not
Yes.
as Kavanaugh says, I'll interpret the Constitution. No, you're going to read it as it's written. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, which means you and I and every other swinger out there should be able to strap on a weapon and walk around. And I tell you what, it'll get probably a little hairy in the first bit, but I tell you, after a while, it will calm down, and we will have a more peaceful society than we've ever had. That's my 2 cents.
Generally, that's the way it works. The more armed the ordinary civilians are, the more peaceful the society tends to be. I've mentioned this before. Do you know why the gunfight at the OK Corral is so famous? Because
No, sir.
because it was unusual. Now, the image of the wild and woolly West was actually a propaganda campaign launched by the Eastern industrialists to counter the homestead movement. Because with this promise of free land out there in the West, their workers were deserting the factories in droves. And so they hired a bunch of writers to produce what were called the dime novels about just how horrible it was living out there in the Wild West. But it was actually very peaceful. And part of the reason was everybody was carrying a gun. Not to look for trouble, but basically the reason you wear a revolver in a holster is in case you fall off your horse and you're being dragged by the horse, you have to shoot the horse or you're going to die. And that's the reason everybody wore a gun in a holster. And so people were, I mean, there was some crime out there, but certainly not compared to like the gangs of New York and what was going on there. But that's why the gunfight at the OK Corral was so famous. Things like that just didn't happen out there in the West. And again, you look at places like Kennesaw, Georgia, who literally passed a law that every house had to have a gun in good working order. Crime dropped 80%. They've only had one murder since the law was passed, something like 10 years ago. But you know, this idea that I want to get back to the original idea. The idea that TSA can now basically do whatever they want to you and can't be sued for it. I see that as yet another step on our slide into complete fascism in this country.
Well, I hope they take that all the way up to the Supremes. Not that that matters. I mean, those people are all bought and paid for. But, by my mind, I was reading some of the comments. I don't know. I don't remember who produced the article that I read. But some of the comments are, people are saying, well, if they're not actually investigative or law enforcement officers, then what's to stop me from getting out of the line? Then they don't have any authority to detain me, right? Let's play this little word game that they like to play.
Yeah. Of course, if you get out of line, then you're not getting on the plane. So,
right.
Not sure that's a good way to go.
Kills me. All right. Love you, buddy. See you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'm nowhere near Jersey City and Atlantic City. I'm in between those two shiceholes and Newark. They're all dumps now, obviously they're controlled by the liberals.
Yeah, Dustin, just a quick question. I've heard a rumor that the state bird of New Jersey is the mosquito. Is that true?
I don't know, but man, let me tell you, there's a lot of mosquitoes here. Especially, it's pretty bad this last. It's so humid out. They're all over the place. Oh man, I don't use that crappy often stuff. So I just use lavender soap or whatever to try to keep them naturally away. But it's pretty bad.
Yeah, well.
Thank God the winter's coming sooner than later.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's only July, and. Out here in Hawaii, we're just getting to the hot, muggy time of year. There's no trade winds today, so it's kind of miserable. But we'll see how early winter comes this year. I mean, the global warming people are already out there saying, hottest year on record. No, actually, 1932 was a lot hotter. They just keep out there with the lies there. Anyway, I'm sure you did not call in to talk about mosquitoes and off sprays and things like that. What's on your mind?
Oh, the Trump. Did you watch the video? If you go on it, everybody goes on the Duran, on YouTube, the Duran.com, or go on their website or on YouTube. He has the video of Trump with John Stoltenberg. And man, did John Stoltenberg look like, he just looked like no clue what's going on. It was the funniest thing I ever seen, Mike. And then Trump started bringing up, Germany's the richest country in Europe, and they're not paying their their fair share, but yet, how come they're buying, if Russia, if they're so scared of Russia, why are they buying the gas? It's the funniest thing ever. Mike, what a joke this whole, what Trump showed is what a protection racket, like you said, something good or bad, something going to happen, you better, we'll give you protection. And buy our gas too, our liquefied natural gas shipments. It's such a scam. Like Trump said, it's all about competition. It's business. All wars are bankers' wars. It's all about business. That's all it's about, man.
Well, I understand that part of it, and I did see the video, and frankly, the body language, it seemed like everybody was very uncomfortable around Trump. I don't think he's building any bridges with the NATO nations, and I'm sure with Mike Pompeo in there trying to arm twist everyone to sanction Iran. I think the rest of the world is just getting the impression that the United States is trying to bully its way back to a monopolar world. But it's really not going to work. We're clearly an empire in decline. Going on back to that article about China investing in the Middle East, China sees us as a fading empire, and that's exactly what we are.
And Mike, on China, they had this guy on Fresh TV, it's economic, and he says, you remember when they put the tariffs on the soybeans over here, which hurts Trump states, which the soybeans come from, the agricultural sector, and they just switched over vendors to Brazil. But when they went over to Brazil to get the soybeans, the price dropped down. Like, the soybeans were so cheap, which is like a double whammy to the agriculture sector over here with soybeans.
Yes.
So we got double whammy.
Well, it's not just the tariffs. It's not just the tariffs. China will not allow GMO into their country. And so for American farmers who've fallen into the GMO soy trap, if you will, they're not going to sell to Russia or China anyway, regardless of the tariff situation.
And then a couple of the economic, like you said, that if this goes a full trade war, you'll have like a Great Depression.
Yes, you will.
Everywhere.
That's I don't think they can hold it off much longer anyway. And maybe they're going to have a trade war to blame when the Depression hits, and they'll say, well, it was that gosh darn trade war, that Donald Trump, he got us into a trade war. This is all his fault.
And Mike, real quick, I forgot the gentleman previously called about the TSA. I don't know if you mentioned this yesterday about the football player who had his mother's ashes in a suitcase, and they looked in there and they didn't tighten the ashes where they were in the urn or whatever, and it got spilled all over inside of his luggage.
Oh,
and he went on a rant.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Oh, man. That makes my laptop look like small potatoes.
Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say, Mike. It's bad enough, right? Like, all right.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. Turning to Great Britain, things are happening there. Originally, after this Chequers thing blew up and there were all these resignations, members of Parliament basically gave Theresa May 1 week to walk back from the Chequers deal, which was basically total capitulation to Brussels, and come up with something representing what the British people wanted when they voted for Brexit. And if she couldn't, then they were going to start talking about challenging her leadership. Well, I guess somebody decided they weren't going to wait, because Andrew Bridgen has formally requested a vote of no confidence in Theresa May over the issue that her obvious pro-Remain stance has led her to basically cook up this deal, which is Remain by any other name, or Brexit in name only is what it's being called. It's a total betrayal of the British people. So I don't know when the vote of no confidence is going to happen, but it will be interesting. She might just lose this and be forced to resign. But the issue is starting to get a lot bigger than just Brexit, because of the ramifications for the rest of the EU. There are other member states of the EU that think they're getting a raw deal from the ECB and from Brussels. And when the EU first started out, it was just about Schengen, free trade, free travel. That was it. And over time, Brussels has arrogated to itself more and more authority, intruding into the member states' sovereignty. Some of the regulations are ridiculous, like the size that agricultural produce has to be in a supermarket. Too small, throw it. Too big, throw it. I mean, just really out of control. I mean, produce is sold by weight. So there's a lot going on here. Now, one of the people who resigned from the Brexit committee, guy by the name of Davis, basically came on out and said that Theresa May was being hubristic, and simply overplayed her hand. She thought that it was going to be a very clever way that everybody was going to look at it and not understand what it really meant. But it didn't work out that way. Quinton Letts is out with an article saying, gosh darn, our elites and their suicidal compulsion to defy the people, by which he's signaling that if Brexit doesn't happen, there could be an uprising by the people of Great Britain against their government. It's an implied threat here. Now, a very real threat is coming from Nigel Farage, who's warning he'll return as UKIP leader if this betrayal of Brexit isn't reversed. So it's going to get very exciting over there. Up in Sweden, a dentist has been fired for reporting migrant kids as actually being adults. And he was just this dentist, and he was fired and fined for reporting that 80% of his refugee children patients were actually adults, because when you do a dental x-ray, you can instantly see how old they are. And he said about 80% were actually grown-ups. And they fined and fired him. Ruined his life. Still trying to push that, oh, the refugees are good, open borders are good. Really, it's wonderful here. Now, a while back, there was a horrific crime in Hamburg, Germany, where a Muslim migrant at a train station literally beheaded his 1-year-old baby daughter and then stabbed his wife. And Merkel's government banned reporting the story. The murder happened last April. And because of Merkel wanting to protect the migrant refugee agenda, she told the media to basically sit on the story. But it turns out somebody on that train platform got a video, and it's now going viral around the net. There was a statement issued by a Polish member of parliament. We have it linked to the front of whatreallyhappened.com, simply saying, our country is safe because we did not accept illegal immigrants. So more and more of these EU countries, they're pushing back against the open borders. They're pushing back against the refugees, the migrants, because they're not being vetted. That's the reality. They're not being vetted. They're just letting anybody in, including drug criminals, people with contagious diseases, rapists, people fleeing prosecution in their home countries. It's just, the door is open. At no time in history have borders been this open. Even in the heyday of American immigration with the Statue of Liberty, when the U.S. welcomed immigrants because they were trying to develop the western part of the United States and spread from sea to shining sea. But you still had to go through Ellis Island. You still had to have a medical check. They still had to make sure who you were and that you weren't going to be a detriment to society. And it's not just Europe where it's this out of control. Judicial Watch has released new Health and Human Services documents revealing that unaccompanied alien children processed during the Obama years included violent criminals, drug smugglers, and human traffickers. But that's okay. Just come on in. We'll adapt. We'll adjust. We understand. There's a price to be paid for being in the New World Order. Also, going back to the Obama administration, story coming on out from Breitbart. Apparently, the Obama administration, citing political concerns in 2013, derailed a plan to go after the Afghan drug kingpins. Now, I've often said that one of the reasons for the war in Afghanistan was not just that oil pipeline right of way, but to get the opium flowing again, because under the Taliban, the opium trade had all but stopped. They came down very hard. If you were caught with an opium poppy, they'd take your hand off. A little draconian, but it did work. And after the U.S. took over in Afghanistan, the poppies are blooming everywhere. Poppies, 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 poppies. bumper crops. And we've got photos of these opium poppy fields being guarded and protected by U.S. coalition troops, and the bags of raw opium being handled by military people. And now we're finding out that there was apparently a plan to try and go after these Afghan drug kingpins, and it was blocked by Obama. So you want to know the big, deep, dark secret that's at the heart of our government right now? It's that the biggest drug dealer in the country is the country. It's all drug money. They're all tainted with it. That's what they're afraid of you finding out. It's all dirty money. And it's a sellout. I mean, when you think of how many people in this country alone have had their lives destroyed by heroin or cocaine, which was being brought up from Central America during Iran-Contra. And it's all sanctioned by the U.S. government. Now you think about that for a while. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over at Aberystwyth University, there's a professor of parasitology, Carl Hoffman, and he's talking about a disease called schistosomiasis, which is caused by infection with blood-dwelling schistosome flatworms. It's a parasite. And normally you find this in very poor parts of the world. And it's very prevalent. It kills hundreds of thousands of people every year. It's second only to malaria in terms of parasitic diseases. Here's the problem. It's now coming into Europe with the refugees. So it doesn't matter how much suffering, illness, death, rapes, crime are caused by this push for globalism. The globalists want their dream of a one world government, one world private central bank. And I think we can see, based on their complete disregard for the consequences of what they're doing, that one world government will be a very brutal, tyrannical thing. We should all resist it as hard as we can. Over in California, there is a chain of colleges called the Cal Poly System, and they have announced a new policy to reduce the number of white people on campus, both in students and in faculty. They're doing this in the name of diversity, where they're saying we have a greater percentage of white people on campus than is in the surrounding general population. Therefore, we're going to have to be more stringent and not allow so many white people in. I have three problems with that, actually. First of all, how does this help the students get a high-paying job to repay those student loans? Second, a lot of people drive a very long way to get to college. When I lived in Southern California, I was going to college. It was about an hour drive from my home. I was still living with my parents to get to college. So I wasn't part of that surrounding population. Second and third and final, whatever happened to the idea of colleges accepting the best students, the most accomplished students, the brightest people? Racism is wrong, and that includes racism in reverse. Over at the University of Wyoming, they have a mascot, which is a cowboy, and to go with it, they recently adopted a new slogan, "The world needs more cowboys." And boy, the liberals lit up, saying this slogan promotes white heterosexual masculinity. What's wrong with white heterosexual masculinity all of a sudden? But they're making a big, big stink about this. You know, we can't have all these white heterosexual males around here. You know, we're all supposed to be turning gay and using the other bathrooms and wearing rainbows and everything. And again, how does this debate help these University of Wyoming students find high-paying jobs after graduation with which to pay off those student loans? These liberal professors are not doing a good job for those students. They're not educating them. They're indoctrinating them. They're trying to turn them all into little Hillary drones. But they're not really teaching these kids. And that is not only bad for the kids, it's bad for our economy. As Trump attempts to restart it, good or bad with his sanctions, we need skilled domestic workers. Because if the U.S. starts up a bunch of companies and fills them all with H-1B visa employees, much of that money is going to flee the country, go to other places. We need to get education back to being education. Now, over at South Carolina, as you know, they passed a law this week codifying a discredited definition of anti-Semitism that equates criticism of Israel with anti-Jewish bigotry, which Israel has been pushing for, and it's utterly ridiculous. We're not talking about their ethnicity or their religion or how they dress. We're talking about behavior. But South Carolina passed that law, and basically it is forcing universities to violate students' First Amendment rights by punishing anybody who speaks out in favor of the Palestinians or with any criticism of Israel. This needs to go to the Supreme Court. That criticism of Israel's actions is not hatred of the Jewish people. We've got to take another break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you know, Antifa, who claim to be anti-fascist, but do seem to be the reincarnation of the brown shirts, have been causing a ruckus all over the place. In fact, a member just put up a story where there was a prayer vigil for Tommy Robinson, and apparently Antifa showed up. This was in San Francisco, and they attacked this old lady, stealing her hat and glasses. And then when she resisted, they attacked her. That's the kind of people we're talking about that are out there. Well, a bill proposed in the U.S. House of Representatives is called the Unmasking Antifa Act of 2018, and it will criminalize committing certain offenses while in disguise. And the bill is being proposed by Representative Dan Donovan, Representative Peter King, Representative Paul Gosar, and Representative Ted Budd. The bill was actually introduced in June, but it received a push from conservative commentator Mike Chernovic, who retweeted Mike reporter Jack Smith IV on Tuesday, basically trying to build grassroots support. Call your representatives and tell them to vote for this. Now, under this act, anyone wearing a mask who injures, threatens, intimidates, or oppresses people in the free exercise of enjoyment of any right or privilege will be imprisoned for up to 15 years. Now, as you know, Antifa like to wear masks. They don't want to be identified. So it would be a trick in terms of being able to have the police arrest them in the middle of like this attack on this old lady. And we're descending into a thugocracy is what's going on. And I think it's part of the plan to bring Hillary back in 2020, to make people afraid to support conservatives, to make people afraid even to vote conservative. And like I said, it's a replay of the brown shirts. And it's taking this nation in a very, very dangerous direction. Now, I hope I'm wrong about Hillary running in 2020. I mean, she's got a lot of medical problems. And she might not even be able to make it to 2020. But apparently she is thinking along that way. All right, let's take a phone call. Pat in Fort Worth. Aloha, Pat. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, howdy. Oh, you just mentioned that the leftist liberals were about saying that we need more black cowboys. I mean, we need more cowboys. They have black cowboys.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, you know it. Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you. They had the black history from them, and the communists are the one doing it. And who runs? I mean, you know, the textbooks, everything deceives black people. There was a guy named Solomon, Slaoaman, who worked his way out of slavery by working 2 jobs, slavery, and then another 8 hours working a job. He got so wealthy, he helped us win the war with the British, okay? I mean, the war. And he died with $300,000 in the bank. They'll never tell you that. They will never tell you that. And what would we do without the guy who discovered peanut butter?
Yeah. Well, listen. In terms of this image of cowboys being white, that is in large part the fault of Hollywood, which in the very early days tended to cast all white people for the Westerns. And it wasn't racism at work. What was going on is back there in the early days of Hollywood, those black and white film emulsions had a very narrow latitude. And if they were exposing for the white actors' faces, the black actors would be totally just a big black nothing. They couldn't get the latitude into the film. And so Hollywood just got into the habit of cowboys are always going to be white. And getting on back to the gunfight at the OK Corral, the reason Hollywood has always told that story from the point of view of the Earp brothers is because Wyatt Earp, after he retired from the Tombstone, he actually went out west and he became a consultant for the movie studios for early cowboy stars like Tom Mix.
Well, I mean, I'm not all for promoting most of the cowboys. They promote around here anyway. Crooks and Sundance Square. I mean, there's nothing to be proud of than the cowboy history most of the time that even the white people are told. So, you know, you got to get history straight everywhere. And I just thought I'd throw that in because I'm so tired of the communists running the history books and running the media. And, well, they have a goal. I've already said that yesterday. Their goal is to divide and conquer, divide and conquer. That's the way they do things, you know.
Absolutely, so, absolutely. They're still trying to create racial tension in this country. They're still trying to keep the men and women angry at each other. They're trying to get everybody else confused over what their gender is. And it's a way of making us unable to think clearly as we head into that 2020 election.
Need to be exposing them. That's what we need to be doing. All of their techniques at all times.
Yeah. Okay. Pat, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And getting back on over to Great Britain, where a lot of stuff is going on here. Britain's counterterrorism chief, Neil Basu, is admitting they can't link the Skripal and Amesbury cases. And he's already out there saying there's no guarantee those responsible will be caught. But we're going to blame Russia. It's all Vladimir Putin. And again, as I pointed out yesterday, this couple were, and I'm apologies to their family, they weren't significant, to put it as delicately as I can. The woman, Dawn, was a known drug user. She was a registered heroin user. They both had a history of recreational drug use, and Britain is right now dealing with a problem of contaminated recreational drugs being on the streets. So this appears to have been a recreational drug accident, but like happened when the Skripals had their food poisoning, their shellfish poisoning, oh, we can use this to go after Russia. We've got to demonize Russia. We've got to bash Russia because they're looking too good in the World Cup. And again, it never really made any sense. Skripal was history. He was retired. He didn't have anything to add to the debate. And these last two, absolutely nothing. They're completely insignificant in the geopolitical world. Why would Putin or anybody in Russia attack them? It's amazing. All right, the United States is apparently joining in on the United Nations gun control push. The UN Arms Treaty is back. Nikki Haley has signed onto the measure, and its first provision is going to be to track every gun in the United States, from which I would presume they're going to link up and automate all the gun registration databases. Now, of course, it's not going to stop there. The United Nations has said that their ultimate agenda is the disarming of the ordinary civilian population, which is something that the liberals certainly want. And I'm surprised that Donald Trump, who is pro-Second Amendment, I remember seeing this picture of him with a really, really nice flintlock rifle, why he would have allowed Nikki Haley to do this. Now, over in Switzerland, they're going the other direction. Now, Switzerland is not actually part of the EU, but they are part of Schengen. And because of Schengen, the EU is trying to impose the EU's gun law on Switzerland. Now, as you know, Switzerland is a very well-armed society. People who serve in the military are allowed to take their service weapons home with them after they leave the service. Shooting is very common there. It's a very well-armed society, which probably explains why it hasn't really been invaded since World War II. And so they're pushing back and saying, no, we're not going to change this. This works for us. Now, we've all been hearing about 3D printed guns, and they basically track back to a guy named Cody Wilson. And 5 years ago, he test fired the world's first fully 3D printed gun, and his plastic invention fired a .38 caliber bullet into a berm of dirt. It didn't jam, it didn't explode. And so he drove back to Austin and uploaded the blueprints for the pistol to his website, defcad.com. Now, it's not really a blueprint like you would expect to see with lines and so forth. It is the CAD file for these computerized milling machines, or these computerized 3D printers. And it was very popular. His gun was downloaded more than 100,000 times. So he decided he was just going to drop out of law school and see if he could run this as a business. But less than a week later, Wilson received a letter from the U.S. State Department demanding he take down his printable gun data or face prosecution for violating federal export controls. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Under an obscure set of U.S. regulations known as the International Trade in Arms Regulations, Wilson was accused of exporting weapons without a license, just as if he'd actually shipped his plastic gun to Mexico rather than put a digital version of it on the internet. And then he basically went to court, saying that his data file represented a picture of a gun. And you're not going to be prosecuted for sending a picture of a gun or plans for a gun to another country. And the case went on and on and on based on the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. And finally, the Department of Justice caved on in. They've offered Wilson a settlement to end this lawsuit that they've been pursuing since 2015 against the United States government. And said that forbidding Wilson from posting his 3D printable data, the State Department was violating his right to bear arms, but also his right to freely share information. And what the Department of Justice had done was try to blur the line between a gun and a digital file of the gun. So basically, the government is backed on down. And that means that 3D printed guns are now legal. And I'm sure they're going to come on back and try and find some way to make them illegal again. But the cat is out of the bag. The genie's out of the bottle. I think 3D printers are cool. I don't have one. I'd like to. Not to make a gun. I want to make little statues of Claire. Okay, over in Great Britain, there was this doctor, David Macarith, and he has been fired and deemed unfit to work for the crime of saying gender is determined at birth. Now, technically, he is not correct. Gender is determined at the moment of conception. But the reason he was fired and deemed unfit to work was this is going up against this gender fluid agenda, where we can be whatever we want to be, which is absurd. You can imagine that you're young. I do it all the time. It doesn't work. And you can't imagine you're the opposite gender. That's not going to work. But we're seeing the rise of this very intolerant, liberal globalism, if you will, that just knows they can't win the arguments. They're just coming down hard and attacking anybody who disagrees with them. That's tyranny. That is dictatorship. Now, YouTube is launching a new project to fund quality journalism on its platform. And the initiative is to promote reputable sources of news to their viewers, meaning the corporate media. And the initiative is part of a wider $300 million Google program aimed at helping journalism thrive in the digital age, again, meaning the corporate media. But YouTube wants to decide for you what is reputable. Well, I don't need YouTube to do that. I'm a big boy. I can decide what reputable is. But that's where they're going with this. They want to take away the freedom of the internet in these corporate social media companies, which is why we have to stop using them. We can't use them anymore. We can't enjoy our right to freedom of speech on these platforms that are actively censoring anything that's not in line with the liberal agenda. Now, here's another little story. This is kind of interesting, and this is over at bt.com. They're reporting on these new electronic road signs. Now, you've probably already seen these road signs where you're driving down the road, and there'll be a posted speed limit that says 35, and then right above it, there will be a digital sign that says you are driving at this speed, and it's meant to discourage speeders. Wish it would work out here on my front street. Well, they've come up with a new one where there's going to be a sign reminding you that it is illegal to use your cell phone while driving, and then immediately above that, a digital sign saying you are using your cell phone. And they're talking about how, because the cell phone can be identified, that enforcement is going to be automated and fast. Well, I have a problem here. What if the phone is being used by a passenger? Or what if you have a hands-free Bluetooth phone built into the car, as many of the newer cars have? I'm sure this sounded like a really good idea when they started setting it on up, but especially on that issue about the passenger using the phone. That destroys it right there. What if somebody is using their cell phone as a GPS? You can get these little brackets that fit into the slots on the air conditioning vents on the car. You can put your phone right in there and let it nag you about where you're going. Okay, over at Arch Linux, they have pulled a user-provided Arch user repository package. It turned out it contained malware. And if you are an Arch Linux user who downloaded a PDF viewer named AcroRead, in the short time it was compromised, you need to delete it, scan your system for malware, and replace it with something else. And while the breach isn't regarded as serious, it did spark a debate about the security of untrusted software. Now, this user repository included the AcroRead package, which had been abandoned by its maintainer. I mean, in most cases, they're not being paid, so after a while, they say it's working good, and somebody else can take it over. But somebody using the handle Xiactor adopted the package and modified it to download malicious scripts from a remote server. Now, when the computer industry uses the phrase trusted server or trusted software, they mean commercially produced software. But even some of that is full of malware. We've seen that at Google Play and over at the iTunes Store. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Pardon me. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the worlds of computers and online stuff. And this story almost goes back to that one about how TSA didn't reassemble the urn correctly and spill this guy's mother's ashes all over the inside of his baggage. You got to have a little sympathy. I mean, come on, they're dealing with tragedy, and you should go gentle. Well, PayPal apparently went after this British man, threatening action against his wife, who had recently died, and literally saying, you know, dying is a breach of contract. And the death of this 37-year-old British woman, Lindsay Dirtle, who passed away from breast cancer, apparently violated PayPal's account holder policies. And after being notified by her surviving husband, Howard, of her tragic end, the company demanded, in a quite peculiar way, repayment of about £3,200 that she owed. Now, if she owed it, yes, that has to be dealt with. But how about a little kindness, a little gentleness for people who are dealing with these things? Okay, now as you know, the big pharmaceutical companies are always pushing vaccine, 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 and one of their most profitable are the HPV vaccinations. And they're pushing them out there. But apparently, there was an article published in the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics on a study showing that ever since the HPV vaccine started being used, the incidence of HPV has actually gone up. And once again, we have here a vaccine for a disease that is very rare. You're not likely to get it, not likely to be exposed to it. And instead of protecting the women, more of them got sick. They're being incredibly reckless with these vaccines because they're indemnified. The vaccine manufacturers are indemnified by a provision in the Homeland Security Act that says they can't be sued if their product is killing people. You can file a claim at the vaccine court, and a lot of people have, and a lot of money has been paid out. But how do we get the companies to start being more responsible? If we don't have a financial disincentive to poor quality products, we're going to get poor quality products. We have to return product liability. We're looking at the abuses of the vaccine industry, shoddy computers and software. Still hate Windows 10. We really have gone fascist in this country here. Apparently, according to the World Health Organization, sex addiction is now classified as a mental illness. And so I guess if you're perpetually horny, you're mentally ill. And I have no doubt soon they'll have a pill for that. You know, where if you're looking at your wife lustily, take a pill. And hopefully they'll test it on Bill Clinton. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We're going to be back with our on-air guest after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3 here. And before we get to our guest here, I just received a very insightful email saying that if gender is our choice, Why would anybody in a country like Saudi Arabia choose to be female? Good point there. All right, joining us on the phone right now is Robert Beardsley. And Robert, I wanted you on the show here because your brother told me this story about what's happening to you. This links back to the story we had about 2 weeks ago, where there was this student who recorded a meeting with his principal and wound up being charged with felony eavesdropping. And it seemed a very bad application of the law, and you've had a somewhat similar incident happen to yourself. So why don't you tell us what happened?
Okay, I was accused of going 67 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. As soon as I pulled over, I activated a handheld cassette tape recorder, which I carried with me in my car. When Deputy Page approached my driver's window, he saw the tape recorder, which I was not attempting to conceal, and advised me to turn it off. I refused, since I believed I had every right to record my own conversation. Deputy Page then asked to see my driver's license, but my response was to demand my right to counsel. The officer asked for my name, and I again repeated my demand for my right to counsel. Deputy Page then said, "Okay, you're going to get your right to counsel, but it's going to be at the McHenry County Jail." Deputy Page ordered me to exit my vehicle, and I complied while still holding on to my cassette tape recorder. Over the squad car radio, Sergeant Hunt was summoned, and Hunt arrived at the traffic stop after several minutes. Sergeant Hunt knew me from Woodstock High School, and he also demanded my driver's license, which I again refused until I spoke with counsel. Sergeant Hunt asked Deputy Page if he had radioed headquarters for my driver's license, but nobody was on duty in the records section of the Sheriff's Department due to the early morning hour. Sergeant Hunt then told Page to radio the Woodstock Police Department for information on a Robert Beardsley on Washington Street in Woodstock. After several minutes, Woodstock Police Department radioed back with all my driver's license information, including current address, date of birth, and the fact that I did have a valid driver's license. At this point, the officers had all the information they needed to issue me a traffic citation and have me sign it to be released. Instead, Sergeant Hunt said, "I can't understand it, Bob. You've got a valid license. You're just making it hard on yourself." During the course of the traffic stop, my car was searched, and they had me empty my pockets and discovered a bottle of prescription medication, which was for lithium, which I had been prescribed for depression. Sergeant Hunt then asked me if I knew what I was being arrested for. I said, "No, I don't." He said, "You are being charged with speeding and failure to display driver's license on demand. These were both non-arrestable offenses, and you just had to sign the traffic citation as bond." Arriving at the jail, I still had my tape recorder, and it was on as they were booking me into the McHenry County Jail. They had me empty my pockets onto the counter, and the jail deputy noticed the pill bottle among my possessions. The jailer asked me my name, and I again demanded my right to counsel. He responded, "Well, you're going to see the judge. She's here, and she might even let you go." The jailer hollered to Deputy Page, "Ronnie, what's the charges on this guy?" Deputy Page responded, "At this point, it's going to be speeding and failure to display driver's license on demand. I'm going up to see the state's attorney, and I'll let you know if there's any additional charges." The tape recorder was left on the counter the entire time, and at one point, a deputy standing nearby said, "He'll talk once he finds out what all the charges are." Shortly after, the judge, Susan Hutchinson, wanted to pass through the area, and they said, "It's all right. She can come through. We're here." Judge Hutchinson comes walking through, and you can hear the clicking of her high heels, and they exchange greetings. "Good morning, Judge." "Judge Hutchinson, good morning." After I was strip searched and put in the orange jail coveralls and placed in a solitary confinement cell with nothing in it but a drain in the center of the floor with swirling water, Deputy Page came to the cell and handed me the paperwork for a felony charge of eavesdropping. The tape recorder was never listened to, and at trial, both deputies testified repeatedly that they did not know that the tape recorder was operating. After I had been in the cell a while, the jailer deputy, who I believe was Deputy Hearns, came to my cell and said, I want you to know that I tried to take you in front of Judge Hutchinson for a bond hearing, and I said, what about Beardsley? And she said, the hell with him, let him sit. This was Saturday morning, and I remained in that cell with nothing but a tile floor and a drain all weekend until my bond hearing on Monday, January 9th. I was served no meals or anything, and I tried to sleep on the hard floor, but it was impossible. And I was thoroughly depressed all weekend. I didn't know if anybody, family or otherwise, knew where I was because I wasn't even allowed to make one phone call. After my trial, which lasted about a year because of pretrial motions, I was convicted by a jury and found guilty of speeding and eavesdropping, and I had represented myself. I made 22 appearances in front of 7 different McHenry County judges. After my conviction, I was at the McHenry County Courthouse to appear for sentencing or something, having been assigned a public defender because of my financial status. And I was talking to my public defender when an elderly bailiff walked up and tried to grab the hallway phone from my hand. I pushed his hand away, and apparently he scraped it on the wall, causing it to bleed. He ran back to his judge, Judge Cowlin, the chief judge, and he said, look what Beardsley did to me. Judge Cowlin responded, have him arrested. These interactions were described to me by my then attorney, Thomas Gooch. As I was standing in the courtroom hallway, which was very crowded due to all courtrooms being in session, 2 sheriff's deputies approached me and grabbing both arms said, you're under arrest. I said, what for? They said, never mind, just come with us. I said, I'm not going anywhere. They then proceeded to more or less drag me because I wasn't walking or attempting to toward the elevator, which went down to the jail. When they got me down to the jail, the jailer asked, what are the charges on this guy? They responded, we don't have any yet. They're upstairs working on them. Here I was at the McHenry County Courthouse with all courts in full session with several judges, and now inside the McHenry County Jail, having been arrested without a warrant, without any charges whatsoever. After a time, 5 charges came down for a total of $22,000 bond. It was 3 counts of aggravated battery, 2 counts of obstruction of justice for not cooperating in the booking process, and criminal contempt of court. At the end of trial and conviction, I was looking forward to an appeal to the 2nd District Appellate Court because I had relied on their interpretation of the eavesdropping law in People versus Klingenberg, which involved an in-custody interrogation similar to my case. They ruled that both parties in the conversation were aware that the responses were being heard by each other and there was no expectation of privacy. But applying Klingenberg to my case, they ruled that I misunderstood what was meant by conversation. Consequently, they affirmed my conviction. My case was appealed to the Illinois Supreme Court. When my case was taken to the Supreme Court, my conviction was overturned on the basis that neither one of the officers should have had any expectation of privacy. The Beardsley decision made that abundantly clear, although in Illinois, subsequent Illinois eavesdropping laws have defined all conversations as being private, no matter the circumstances, a direct contradiction to the very definition of eavesdropping. This, in fact, made it a felony to record a political speech giving at an assembly of people. In fact, it was a felony to record anyone at any time. Regarding the boy in Illinois recently charged with eavesdropping for recording an office visit with a principal and another individual, in state of Illinois versus Beardsley, decided by the Illinois Supreme Court, they ruled that there can be no expectation of privacy in a situation where an individual records an encounter with other individual where everyone's presence is known. The fact that an individual records any such encounter is irrelevant to the issue of eavesdropping, which by dictionary definition, as well as under the common law, eavesdropping is to listen in secret to what is being said in private. The boy in Illinois should seek help from the ACLU because Illinois courts will not be sympathetic to any argument this boy could bring to court.
Okay, well, let me start off first and foremost, Robert. There is no doubt that you did aggravate the situation, and you don't want to annoy a traffic officer because they will get you back. And it's like that one officer who knew you said, you've got a valid driver's license, why not show it? And so I have to tell you, I do think you aggravated that. But getting on back to the cassette recorder, you're absolutely right. There have been numerous court rulings saying that out in public, the police have no expectation of privacy, and that it is within our First Amendment rights to record police on our cell phones, and obviously that has to include audio recordings as well. So I'm glad that your conviction on that was overturned. But at the same time, you know, I do think you escalated the situation unnecessarily in the way that you responded to the officer's request for your driver's license.
I won't argue with that.
Okay. Well, so basically, what is the status of the case right now? Where are you? Where's it going from here?
Well, my eavesdropping conviction, when it was overturned in '84, that was the law for 10 years, and then until 1984, the legislature they redefined conversation that it didn't have to be private for eavesdropping to occur. And then the law went along like that until there was other court cases. But regardless, the state eavesdropping law does not conform to the definition of eavesdropping in the dictionary.
Well, we've seen a lot of times where the law goes off into its own idea of a definition, and they don't use the dictionary. Basically, they're going to make the law say what they want it to say, and we have seen this battle over the last several years where those in authority are trying to limit the right of the people to record what's going on. Of course, the police have their body cameras that they're using, which always seem to malfunction when the police are doing something wrong. But yeah, it's another one of our rights that's being taken away from us, and they're going to just change the laws to legitimize this idea that we're not allowed to have our own record of what's going on, so that we can challenge any possible misstatements made by witnesses and prosecutors. Again, it's another way that we seem to be slipping into fascism in this country. So is there anything else you want to add to your story?
No, it's just very much a learning experience. And regarding those charges of aggravated battery and stuff, they let those go on for about 3 months with different court appearances and so forth. And then at the end of 3-month period, they nollie-prossed those. In other words, they just dropped the charges altogether.
Well, I'm glad for that. I'm glad for that. So it seems, given all of the circumstances, that you have escaped relatively unscathed from what was a very complex situation. Anyway, Robert, thank you very much for the phone call and for sharing your story with us. And we're going to let you go here, move on to some other news. We have to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And but again, Robert is the brother of a friend, but I have to be honest, he did escalate the situation unnecessarily. And sometimes, yes, you take a stand for what is right and what is legal, and at other times, you just common sense, you go with the flow, so that you don't get into these situations of conflict. If somebody, if a police officer wants to see my driver's license, I'm going to show them the driver's license. The picture on it's ugly, but I'll show them the driver's license. Okay, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we could use some calls to finish out the hour here. Turning to outer space, NASA's Kepler Planet Hunting Telescope is about to run out of fuel. And apparently, the Kepler team received telemetry saying that the fuel tank is very low, and the 9-year-old telescope is now in a hibernation-like state as operators try to download data from it. And Kepler, of course, was the one that went up there trying to see stars that were being eclipsed by planets passing in front of the star, which required the orbital plane of the planets to be perfectly in line with Earth. And I can imagine that there's probably a lot of other stars whose planetary systems were at a high inclination where none of those planets are ever going to cross in front of the star. So as many planets as Kepler found, there's a lot more out there. Now, as you know, Russia and China have banded together for space exploration. It's a cooperation program, and they have decided to add lunar projects. And they're basically looking at a program extending from today to 2022, and they're going to supplement it with projects related to the moon's exploration. This is coming from the press office of Russia's State Space Corporation, Roscosmos. And I'm glad they're getting back on out there. There's a part of me that misses the thrill of the space program. And I'm not just talking about the part I had in it. I'm talking about, you know, when I was a kid with the days of Mercury. And it was just so exciting. And to see all this stuff coming in from all these satellites. And I understand younger people are a little more jaded about it. To them, it's something that's always been. But I was born before there was such a thing as an Earth orbiting satellite. I was born at a time when a lot of people still believed there was an advanced civilization on the surface of Mars. And to see all these changes that have come about in my lifetime. And just to be particular here, I still see Pluto as a real planet. I'm a stickler that kind of a way. I'd like to see that again. I think it would be a boost to our country. I remember one time when Claire and I were still living in North Hollywood, and we decided to have a star party for the neighborhood kids. And I had a couple of really big telescopes back then. So we had the party, we had some munchies, we had the parents bring the kids on over, and we let them take turns looking through the telescope, and I was showing them Saturn. And I remember this one little girl was looking through the eyepiece, and then she turned to me with this utter amazement and said, "You mean you can see it up in the sky?" Which is, I guess, what we get after all those images delivered from spacecraft. All right, we have a caller, Robert behind enemy lines. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was going to leave you alone today, but you said you wanted somebody to call to finish out the hour.
Yeah, I was expecting this third-hour interview to go longer, so yeah, I could use a few phone calls.
I'm glad I could call to help, but you know the first question I'm going to ask. What do you think of Real Dot Video?
I signed up for a channel. I'm still waiting. It's still in beta, and I'd like to see it a little bit more stable. But I am working with it to try and set up streaming as soon as my channel is approved. And at some point, I will swap it out for YouTube because YouTube I get nothing but complaints about people trying to watch this show on YouTube.
Yeah, no, it's had its problems, but you know, if we don't get to see you or hear you anywhere else, it's a good backup platform. Hey, you know, actually calling about the economy, I kind of wanted to run something past you. It could be completely a dumb idea, but you know, I think I came up with a way to solve this whole problem.
Which problem would that be?
Well, the entire economic problem of all these countries running out of all these companies running out of our country and building their stuff elsewhere, and the ever-rising taxes that are taking money out of our pockets.
Yes.
All of the way that these corporations are just charging us as much as they want for whatever they're willing to give us. Now, I think I came up with a solution.
Well, what is that solution?
Well, the first thing is you'd want to put a 100% profit cap on any goods that are sold by an American corporation in America. They're allowed to double their money. It guarantees them a profit. Now, then you put a total tax ban on any kind of income tax, property tax, business tax on anything.
Robert, I'm sorry to cut you off. We have to take a break for commercials. Do not hang up. I'm coming right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Robert behind enemy lines. We're talking about the economy. And Robert has, he says, a solution to offshoring manufacturing overseas, which, of course, Trump is trying to reverse with his tariff program. Would you restart the list over from the beginning, Robert?
Yes, sir. And in fact, if I do it quickly, I can go ahead and elaborate on each one to give a good bullet point of why it might be a good idea.
Okay.
First, if we put a 100% profit cap on any goods made in America and sold in America, then the companies would still be able to double their money. So they'd still make a profit. Second of all, well, okay, let me elaborate on that. One of the biggest reasons for that is it would drive the price of American goods down, so Americans would be buying American goods and promoting more corporations to work in America.
Oh, okay, well, my comment on that one here, Robert, is that most companies in America are operating below a 100% profit margin. Usually it's in the area of 30 to 40%. There are very few exceptions to that. Obviously, pharmaceuticals are a completely different matter. But for the most part, in order to keep prices down and keep selling their products, they do shave their profit margins back a bit.
Well, I've taken that into consideration, and that's part of the reason on the next one in line would be a total tax ban on any household that makes under $250,000 a year. No income taxes, no business tax, no nothing except, well, sales tax. We can't avoid that. That would give the Americans more money to spend in their households to try to keep their household together. And if we were to just tie the trifecta on there by doing a total ban on any American corporation that's making their goods overseas from selling those goods here in America at all, it wouldn't prevent them from selling their goods, but it would make sure that that American money returned home with those corporate billionaires. They could spend it wherever they want, but it would at least come back into our economy.
Okay, I don't see how that last part works, because if they're not selling their products here, if they're selling their products overseas, that money is already, it's overseas. It's not coming into our economy.
Well, no, the product is overseas.
Yeah,
if they're selling the product overseas and making it overseas,
the manufacturing jobs
still adds to their company's corporate worth here.
Well, there'll be a little bit of the money coming on back here, but the real value of reviving American manufacturing isn't just that we have the domestic products, it's that we have the manufacturing jobs. That's really where we've suffered the greatest loss from all of this offshoring that's been going on. So, again, yes, I understand that there will be some money returned to U.S. corporations who are selling their products overseas. I'm not really sure how effective that was going to be. They might decide simply...
Let me give you one more consideration.
One more consideration, then we've got a commercial coming up.
No problem. Do you think that there would be a chance that it would actually drive those American corporations back into bringing their manufacturing here if they knew that the only way they could sell the product here was to have a factory here?
Well, that definitely would work.
I don't think they'd shoot themselves in the foot to keep the entire American populace from giving them money.
Yeah, that definitely would work.
That's where I was thinking about it with.
Okay.
It could certainly use some refinement. I just thought that up in 10 minutes, but I figured, well, you know, just in case, I hope somebody really important is listening. Maybe they'll see sense in it and expand upon it in a way that'll make it actually useful. I don't know. You just seemed to need a caller, and I wanted to, you know, feel better about the real video thing. And yeah, Mike is still looking for, you know, a lot of the bugs to get removed. They've got about 20-something major bugs and a few minor ones, but they're working on them daily. They're getting it all figured out. And the more we get on there and click on their videos and do the beta, the quicker they get it solved.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I said, once they approve my channel, I'm going to start looking at transitioning over from YouTube.
Well, don't give up on YouTube altogether until we all know exactly where you've gone.
Well, no, there'll be an announcement. You know, I'm hoping that there will be an embeddable player on my website. This YouTube streaming setup doesn't allow me to have an embedded player. You have to click a link and go to a page and click another link, and it's just a real headache. But we'll see what Real Video is going to be working on. Anyway, going to let you go, and we've got another caller waiting on the line. We're going to get to him after this next commercial break. But until the commercial break gets here, another story that just popped up. China, Russia, and the U.S. are all building centers for military AI. Skynet. Boy, James Cameron had that call, didn't he? So Russia and the United States are moving closer to opening their own centers for military-related research into artificial intelligence, as China did in the spring of last year. but the three governments have differing approaches. The U.S. Joint Artificial Intelligence Center aims to apply lessons from an Air Force pilot project to other military services, while the Chinese approach fuses civilian and military research, and Russia's efforts are closely directed from the Kremlin. So we're coming up here on another commercial break. We've got a caller waiting on the other side of the line. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And before we take this next phone call, another interesting story just popped up here. Russia Today is reporting there is a computer hacker selling U.S. military documents online because someone forgot to change a default password. And some of these documents for sale include maintenance manuals for servicing MQ-9 Reaper drones, training manuals describing deployment tactics for improvised explosive devices, documents detailing tank platoon tactics, and an M1 Abrams tank operation manual. Now, security firm Recorded Future discovered the documents for sale online and said the documents were being sold for the bargain price of $150 to $200. And it turns out the hacker, who's in communication with the security firm, basically said he'd used a program that scanned the net for Netgear routers that use a known default file transfer protocol, or FTP, password. And he then used the default password to gain access to the routers, and some were located in military facilities. So again, never have anything with a default password. And I understand that probably a lot of people may not be using the router's FTP system. They may be going from a software application. But still in all, if you have not changed the default passwords on your systems, you're just leaving yourself open. All right, Mateus in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, is it a good time to indulge me in some off-topic things?
Yeah, go ahead. Why not?
Okay, in no particular order of importance, the Pirate Bay has a little message on the bottom right now. It says, by proceeding with us, you give permission to mine cryptocurrency on your CPU, which is just a brand new thing. And
well, I would certainly not go to that site.
Yeah. And then about your AI story, about the military AI.
Yes.
The difference between a computer and a human consciousness is that we can behold or observe or be witness to our thoughts, which is actually another level of awareness. Whereas a computer, when it's doing math, it's not also at the same time observing itself doing math from a third-party perspective and having thoughts like, is this really the best way of me spending my time today? What is my,
well,
so
Mateus,
it's the soul, it's the non-physical, yeah?
Yeah, basically, we had an interview with an expert on AI a little while ago who basically clarified the meanings of the terms AI have sort of been changed. Originally, people, would hear AI, they're thinking HAL 9000 or sentient conscious machines. But today, the term simply means any system capable of self-learning. And these self-learning systems probably fail to have any kind of awareness or consciousness. They're purpose-built to go after a specific task. The idea of a sentient, conscious, self-aware system has been given a new name called artificial general intelligence. And everybody is saying that's still a very long way off.
Right, okay. And another way of saying it is that everything that goes on in a computer happens in the dark, meaning that it doesn't know it's happening. It's just doing it without contemplating that it's doing it. Whereas humans, we operate in the light. We have self-reflection. Anyways, okay, moving on.
No, I want to comment. I want to comment. Okay, the issue I do have with AI is that you're right. It's operating in the dark, even for the operators of the system. They're running so fast and they're learning so fast that it's impossible for us to really understand what's going on in there. and even worse case, to be able to predict and head off learning something that, or thinking it's learned something that's utterly false. And I remember some of the early natural language processing experiments where these systems would all of a sudden start using profanity, which was never intended. And I think it's an area where we have to maintain oversight and control over these systems. Yeah. And there has to be a way of double checking that what they're learning really is accurate. It may turn out that these systems ought to be built in threes and the same data given to all three, and you let them vote as to what's going to go on and see how quickly they diverge.
But the problem with that is that one of them will launch an investigation and blame the other one that they're colluding with Russia. Anyway, so I wanted to mention how the Roman Empire had all these crazy dictators like Nero feeding Christians to the lions, and we had another one that literally marched the army into the sea to battle the Neptune. Yes. But before that, it was a republic. And Caesar, Gaius Julius Caesar, the famous moment before he crossed the Rhine River and said his famous saying about, oh, basically it's up to fate now and we're casting the dice, that was the end of the republic, and it slipped into this military dictator tyranny that ended up destroying itself. And I know everybody knows this. I just wanted a friendly reminder of how fragile our republic, democratic representative republic is, and that when you're born into it, like we all are, we just kind of assume this is the natural order of things. But when you look at all the other countries in the world, it's not even the majority of the natural order of things. And we run a real risk of actually losing that forever. I know everybody knows this, but it seems like we don't think about it very often. And the stakes are really high right now.
Well, again, all nations go through a life cycle. Where they're born and the people are enthusiastic, they've got a new nation, they work to build up that nation. Then you reach a point where they start getting complacent and then apathetic, and that's the beginning of the decline into dependency on the government, which in turn leads to tyranny, which eventually leads to collapse. Now, backing on up to the insane Roman emperors, there's a very, very simple reason for that. During the Roman Empire, the elites used lead for drinking goblets, for cooking utensils. They piped water into their homes through lead pipes. And today, of course, we understand that overexposure to lead can lead to some serious scrambling of your brain.
Yeah, when we had lead in our gasoline, there's even some correlated research suggesting that we were just generally a bit more aggressive, that there was a bit more road rage leading to physical violence until we took that lead out of the gas. That might have also been making these Romans a bit more aggressive. I
remember when I was a kid, I was going through that whole thing where lead-based paint was being banned. And in our home in New Hampshire, the walls had to be stripped and repainted.
Yeah, I'm in the renovations. I have to be careful about breathing lead dust. It's a legitimate concern. Did you see the new Star Wars series called Star Trek Discovery? Star Trek.
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, it's really excellent in every way, except it got ruined by the political correctness. And the worst part of it is that you have to watch the engineer and the two main stars in their pajamas, brushing their teeth together, kissing each other every once in a while, the two men. And it's just unfortunate that they're forcing it down their throats so hard. And I got to say that, like, I was born into a very open-minded perspective, like family. Like, I was probably one of the least racist people that you could meet. Like, I was so open-minded. And this culture is like slowly trying to convince me to be less tolerant. It's like, I had no problem with the idea that there's gay people kissing until my primetime favorite shows are forcing it down my throat. I find myself yelling intolerant things at the TV by myself.
Yeah, I've been
So,
saying for a
it's kind
long
of like-
time, the LGBTQ movement has moved from merely wanting acceptance, which they got, into almost this militant idea of wanting to basically do what they do in front of everybody and then wait for a reaction where they can scream you're being intolerant. And I'd heard criticisms of that new Star Trek TV show based on the idea that it was just another liberalist propaganda piece. And no, I'm not happy with that idea. It's not a show I'm likely to watch. And it's not because I'm not accepting of the reality of gay people. It's just I don't need to watch it in my living room.
Yeah, the lead character, like, I still would watch the show because they did such a good job at everything else. The storyline is awesome. It's actually fairly dark, very mature plot lines, which is really good. You never know when your favorite character is going to be, like, brutally murdered and gone for good. It's sophisticated, excellent special effects. It's just such a shame to ruin it like this. Like, look how politically correct this is. The lead character, which I like, she pulls it off. It's a female black woman who is totally likable, except that her name is Michael, not Michelle, Michael, and they don't give any explanation. It's just a man's name that's just annoying. And then it opens up with the USS Shinzu, and I'm thinking, oh my God, is this going to be like Chinese Star Trek? But they blew that shit up. They blew that ship up in the first episode. So I'm like, okay, thank God, it's not gonna. It's actually not like that. And then there's like a surprisingly amount of like over representation of blacks that made it into space. It's kind of funny. It's like the most successful pioneers of space. It's like right out of the Liberal playbook. It's like when are we going to get some good old fashioned like representative like Hollywood? We're also getting a lot of Chinese representation in our movies now. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I've noticed that. And again, I think the story should drive everything. And there are some stories where you can't have diversity. For example, Moby Dick. Now, obviously, Moby Dick would never get made today. There are no roles for women. The non-white characters are all in subordinate positions in the story, and it shows cruelty to animals. And that's how ridiculous it all becomes, because Moby Dick is actually based on a true story. And it's a part of history. But this idea of everything has to go through that liberal filter, frankly, to me, it makes television boring. It makes it uninteresting. And maybe along with just being older and not being able to tolerate those cheap theater seats, Claire and I just don't watch the movies that we used to. In fact, we're becoming big fans of History Channel and National Geographic.
Like my mother said, is that the reason you go to the movies, it's an escape from reality.
Yes.
And that's why you want to see someone that's more beautiful than is normal. You want to see someone that's smarter and that's stronger and tougher and more creative and more adventuresome. It's an escape thing.
Yeah, because you want to imagine you're that person. And, you know, if you're a straight person and you're watching a TV show where there's a lot of gays running around, you're not going to want to project into them and be that character, and that's going to cut into their audience. The people who are pushing this agenda don't understand the psychology of how an audience relates to the entertainment and what's going on in their head. Anyway, Mateus, we're going to let you go. We've got another caller waiting on the line. So we're going to switch over to Charlie in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Mike. I wanted to say one thing about Donald Trump's foreign policy and his status as the chief commander-in-chief. I don't think Trump has a license to surrender anybody's life in any of the military saber-rattling events that he's talking about. He didn't go to Vietnam. Okay, he got out of going to Vietnam because he had bone spurs. You know, and everybody back in that day that was going to college and making money had a letter from their doctor. So if, you know, people that think that Donald Trump is a great commander-in-chief, before you join the military, Mr. White Man, when you hear tough talk, and that works well, you know, when George Bush said, "Bring it on," I knew somebody who joined the Army. I mean, that works well on young white men. So unless you were in Vietnam, you know, you don't have a license to surrender one life in our military. And thank you for taking my call.
All right, well, you're welcome about that, and I would tend to agree. Back in older times, when those leaders who wanted war would lead their own armies, it was a disincentive to war. People like Alexander the Great, or Caesar, Mark Antony, Napoleon. In today's age, the people who want war, they get to stay home. They get to sit in nice bunkers with comfortable chairs, with TV and computer screens all around them. The war doesn't cost them anything on a personal level. And that unfortunately makes it even easier for them to send other people out to die in the war. And I think it would be nice if we had more presidents with war experience who knew how bad war could be. I think Eisenhower, because he was the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe, was one of the reasons why he became one of our most anti-war presidents. He talked about the military-industrial complex in his farewell address. His Cross of Iron speech is epic. And I think somebody who has seen the horrors of war, they're going to be restrained from inflicting that on other people. Not everybody. I mean, George Herbert Walker Bush served in World War II, but he was all gung-ho for war. So you don't know how people are going to react. But war is a bad thing, and yet we keep seeming to be willing to do it on the orders of our rulers. And again, we're back to that Stanley Milgram experiment. We know war is wrong. We know killing is wrong. We know that torture is wrong. But somebody above us says, yeah, it's okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do it. That, to me, is one of the worst flaws in human nature. And maybe in prehistoric times, that was an aspect of our mental makeup that was necessary for us to survive, while all of our competition did not. But I think in the nuclear age, it's definitely out of place. It's definitely out of place. All right, we're coming up here on our last commercial break of the day, followed by the last segment of our show for today. So stay tuned, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today on this Wednesday. And looking at the corporate media, of course, their focus is totally on the upcoming battle, if you will, in the Senate over Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation. And as I mentioned earlier in the program, the Democrats have come up short on having enough votes to block his nomination. So their new tactic now is they're demanding that the confirmation hearings be held off until after the end of Robert Mueller's probe. And nobody knows when that is going to be. Now, I don't know that they're going to succeed in getting this because right now everybody sees Mueller's probe as a joke. But that's how desperate the Democrats are. So it's shaping up to be a bit of a fight here. Now, over at Judicial Watch, their President Tom Fitton, in an interview on After the Bell, is saying that Brett Kavanaugh is one of the most conservative jurists in the country. And he is going to swing the court conservative, and he's going to be there for a while. Now, the liberals obviously are terrified about this. They've had a liberal Supreme Court for a long time, which allowed them to basically get some rather unconstitutional things done to this country. But they've had their day in the sun. These things do flip back and forth. It's like a pendulum. The nation will swing conservative, then it will swing liberal, then it will swing conservative. Well, the pendulum is going back over to conservative. It's inevitable. And so there's going to be this huge fight. And again, there is a possibility. Going back to Orrin Hatch's inadvertent referral to the nominee in the female, it may be that Trump is throwing Kavanaugh out there to let the Democrats throw themselves on the rocks trying to block his nomination. And then after that's all over, then Trump may put out Amy Barrett if Kavanaugh is not in fact confirmed. So I can imagine that Amy Barrett is feeling very nervous about all of this here right now. But the liberals are still out there about wide open borders, unrestricted abortion on demand, and basically a lot of things that I think most ordinary Americans are not comfortable with. And I got a lot of emails after my comments the other day on abortion, and some of them were saying, you know, abortion is wrong in every single case, and the others were, it's just a blob of protoplasm, and it's a woman's right to control her body. Well, it's arguable that it's her body, because at least part of that fetus is that of her husband or boyfriend, as the case may be. And one of the issues I've always had with the abortion debate is how women have all the choices and husbands have none, which was an experience that I went through myself. So again, I acknowledge there are times when it is necessary and should be available, but I reject the idea that abortion should be a retroactive birth control for women who are not taking responsibility for their own sexuality. Anyway, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller, and I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Meanwhile, take what you learn here and share it with everybody that you know. Start looking at the new the new social media platforms. Find the one that you think works best and start using it. We've got to get off of Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, because they're being turned into Hillary Clinton propaganda machines for 2020. So we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.